You joined yesterday lecture university. One of his books
One, two, testing, one, two. Two.
Okay, I'll go to maybe. Please, please, welcome. will go to, I will come to. Welcome, the chair, please. Anywhere, probably will be this. Yeah, from there. This.
kita mengambil pada kelas macam mesti tak lambat perlu nak so orang yang I got seven.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على النبي وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. أما بعد. Distinguished guests, brothers and sisters, we are about to start today's session, inshallah. So we kindly request that the switch will go into the silent, so as not to interrupt the session. Today, this is an honor to welcome Professor Dr. Yasser Al, President of the Maqasid Institute Global, to the Abu Sulaiman Abdul Hamid Abu Sulaiman of Islamic knowledge of the census and generation Islamic research. Professor Dr. Shukran bin Abdurrahman, Dean of Healthcare at UM, Associate Professor Dr. Ali Nasrin, Deputy Dean of Academic and Internationalization, Associate Professor Dr. Muhammad Noor bin Abdul Jalil, Deputy Dean, Student Development and Community Engagement, Professor Dr. Hazizan bin, former Deputy Dean, Dr. Badri Abdullah, Deputy CEO and Principal Research Fellow, International Institute of Advanced Islamic Studies in Asia, distinguished academics, guests, students, fellow brothers and sisters. Good afternoon and welcome to the premier lecture. And I'm Dr. Muhammad Muhyiddin, Coordinator of Internationalization of Healthcare. Ladies and gentlemen, to seek the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, let us begin the session with the recitation of the Fatiha. To these purposes, brothers and sisters, now it is a great pleasure to invite Professor Dr. Shukran Rahman, Dean of Healthcare, he should deliver his welcome in the university.
Thank you very much, Dr. and Sila. Alhamdulillah, Rabbil Alamin, wa salatu wassalam ala ashrafil anbiya'i wal mursalin, wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Wa huwa al-insani al-rawhani min al-mubaq. President Jasir Huda, President of the Maqasid Institute. Deputies, Dr. Noor Al-Aini, Professor Hazizan Muhammad Noor, the former Dean of Philosophy and Teachers, academic members. I would like to also acknowledge the presence of Dr. Bantini Abdullah, the Deputy CEO and Principal Research Fellow in the International Institute of Advanced Islamic Studies Malaysia. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. First of all, on behalf of the International Islamic University in general, and also the Hamid Abdul Sulaiman, Kuliah of Islamic Review of Knowledge and Human Sciences, I would like to welcome Professor Auda to Kuliah, or biggest Kuliah in the university, as I mentioned just now. We are very pleased to have you at the last day of your visit to Malaysia. Right, Alhamdulillah, we wish to bring you here on this global campus. So before you leave, so we can depart for your home country tonight, so we can listen and learn from you, and so that we can practice and even share what we are going to learn from you with our students in our community here. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Jasir Huda is a very renowned scholar in the area of Maqasid, and this is why we need to learn, listen from him, especially when many of us, Professor Huda, have been trained in universities other than the IIM. Which orientation or which direction or which philosophy of opinion might be different from that of the organization that we are serving now, right? So we need to be orientated. We need to maybe learn and also unlearn some of the methodology of sourcing knowledge, so that we can further train our students with the methodology of sourcing knowledge as aspired and expected by this institution. That's so in IIM, we are mandated, we are shouldered with the amana into integration, standardization, and relevantisation of knowledge. And we apply to work in this university because we believe in this agenda as well. Right? That very much we are somehow handicapped with the how to do, okay, in the knowledge generation and knowledge dissemination. And we believe that this afternoon we are going to be enlightened and enriched by your knowledge and my experience. So thank you very much, and to my colleagues here, thank you very much for joining us. And I believe that we are going to learn much from this.
Thank you for the argument. Distinguished guests, especially our speaker, the Islamization of Human Knowledge policy was developed by the International Islamic University from the Maqasid as a broad framework that guides communities in understanding and implementing one of its fundamental missions. Since then, IIUM has been working to integrate human knowledge with divine teachings and values to remove the unnecessary misunderstandings between religion and science. Thus, I embark on a comprehensive process of Islamization of human knowledge. To lead the studies and research in the scope of Islamization, integration, and relevantization, IFTHS is enhancing the stacks of deep read, which is teaching, consultancy, research, innovation, and publication to accomplish the IIUM's mission and mission. in line with the IUM's suggested academic framework. That is consisting of IUM vision and missions, formal and informal academic structures, falsafa and academicism, Maqasid al-Sharia, and so on, in response to humanizing education for Rahmatullah. So today, we are very much happy to welcome Professor Dr. Yasir Awdal, President of Maqasid Institute Global, to share with us his knowledge and wisdom about implementing Maqasid al-Sharia methodology in the fields of Islamic studies and human sciences. Without further ado, let's welcome Professor Dr. Yasir. Thank you. I just say that.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. والصلاة والسلام على أسعد الخلق وخاتم الرسل محمد صلى الله عليه وآله ورضي الله عن المهاجرين والأنصار ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. ثم أما بعد. I am really happy to be here. Before I leave, I'm actually going from here straight to the airport. But I insisted that I come because I believe that we have a mission in our generation, the generation of mine, the gray hair, and then the next generation. We have a mission to carry on what our teachers and our scholars did, and we have a mission to complete and to push forward the agendas that they worked for. And no generation is going to be able to complete Islam. Islam was completed only by Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Every generation pushes forward a little bit, as much as we can. And with every generation, we would need a renewal of thought and a renewal of action, renewal of ideas. They are the same ideas, the same aqidah, as I said yesterday in the other building, but a new kalam, and the same sharia, but a new fiqh, and the same paradigm, the same nizam, but a new fiqh, new thought, or the same nizam. Because every 100 years, as the Prophet ﷺ said in the hadith, Oh, I forgot the introductions, and I would like to say that all my brothers and sisters with all new titles and so on. The most dear title is the brothers and sisters. But all your titles and all the dignitaries here acknowledge the Jazakallah khair. I'm excited to be back in a classroom, so I forgot the acknowledgement part of these topics. So basically, we have a mission to push forward, and across when we talked about 100 years, man in the hadith is not just one person, and then we debate whether Imam Shafi'i or Imam Zuhayri. It's not like that. It's man is a group of people, and Allah allows a group of people to renew Islam every 100 years. Why 100? Because every 100 years the world changes a lot. This is a very different planet from 1923. And I'm sure it will be a very different planet in 2123. And 1445, in 1545, it will be a very different planet. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to do that. That is why it is essential that we push forward. The Maqasid methodology is an extension and a daughter or son of the attempts to renew Islamic thought and Islamic mind in the current times. We had a number of schools that emerged, and they claim particular titles, and they have a number of teachers that tried to reform, renew, tried to rectify, and specifically the Islamization of knowledge school and the Wasatiyya school, which perhaps are the schools that I personally am a student of. When I was perhaps a teenager, even before teenager, I was Salafi in a very traditional sense. But alhamdulillah, I grew out of it when I turned maybe 13 or 14. But the Islamization of knowledge and the Wasatiyya schools are the schools that really were trying to develop the Islamic thought of our time in a meaningful way. What we're trying to say is that we need to go beyond the basic systems that the Wasatiyya school lived with. The Wasatiyya school, since the time of Sheikh Muhammad Abdu and Sheikh Rida, and all the way until our Ustad, Sheikh Yusuf Qaradawi, are basically living with systems as they are. When you read, for example, the book of Sheikh Qaradawi of Fiqh Zakat, he is dealing with currency as it is. In fact, he is critiquing people who call to use gold and silver and so on. And he's saying that this is falsafa. This is, a philosophical argument that doesn't have any impact on the ground. And he wanted for Fiqh Zakat to deal with the current zakat, the stock markets, how to deal with them, the pension plans, and so on, the salaries. He dealt with oil, but as a student and a very humble student of his, I would say that he was not a revolutionary in the sense that he did not challenge the current economic system. He proposed and he contributed a great deal to Islamic financing, but at the end, the Islamic financing is part of the capitalist system, even though it is making some of the mu'amalat halal, which gives a solution for people like you and me who would like to avoid riba and do halal as much as we can. But in his fiqh of amwal, he did not challenge the basic premises of capitalist economics. And in his fiqh al-jihad, which is the other major work of Shaykh Rahimahullah, that he finished also before he died, he did not challenge the current paradigm of political systems. In the Muslim world, he talked about Muslim countries that cooperate and so on. But as somebody who studied fiqh al-jihad and discussed it with our Shaykh and all of that, he's not challenging the basic premises of the system that we're dealing with, the basic political premises. And yes, perhaps towards the end, rahimahullah, in our discussions, rahimahullah, in his late 90s, towards the end, we will talk about issues with his students, about issues of challenging the basic system, challenging the economy of the current nation state, and especially in the differences between monarchies and republics and this and that. So these kinds of discussions, but he did not write about that as far as I know. If you're talking about Islamization, Islamization is trying to bring al-aqli wa naqli, trying to add the aqli dimension, and then the integration is trying to even go further than just the original paper of Dr. Farouk rahimahullah al-Shaheed. Let's talk about a student should study one of the sciences of the al-aqliyat, so sociology, psychology, architecture, and one of the sciences of the naqliyat and fiqh, al-usul, al-kalam, and then integrate. That is a very original draft that Dr. Farouk rahimahullah wrote, that is published in various forms. And then eventually integration of knowledge was pushed forward, especially with our Ustad and your Ustad before we, Dr. Hamid Sulaiman rahimahullah, talking about moving towards integration and trying to bring sciences together. And we were influenced by this. I talked yesterday about the systems approach to Usul Fiqh book that I launched here in IT, launched a Malay translation. I said that 20 years ago when I wrote this, I was impacted by the integration of knowledge because I wrote the specialization that I had of systems theory and systems paradigms into the study of Usul Fiqh in a comparative sense, and trying to push forward some of the, if you wish, Maqasidization of the Usul in that sense. That's all. But again, the critique that we could have on the Aqli and Naqli paradigm is that Aqli sometimes was misunderstood to be secular. So if you're going to study Ulum al-Aqliya, you're going to study economics a la Marxism or the Chicago School or even Keynes, you see. And this is all secular. This is not coming from an Islamic or religious, sometimes Christian, but it's not Islamic paradigm. It is coming from a worldview that deals with materialism, secular, let's say, we're talking al-Almaniya from an island, from the material, the objective reality, they say. In Islam, we don't have this objective versus subjective reality because we do not prove truth like that. The Quran is not an objective reality. It's an angel that came from the skies, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, on a mountain. Perhaps the next slide. Okay, I'll go back to this next. Next. Sorry. Yeah, here it is. So basically, an angel came to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam on top of this mountain. And this is our source of knowledge, not just for Muslims, for humanity. This is not an objective reality. This is an angel bringing a message from Allah. This cannot be proven with the five senses. This is something that we take for truth, what we believe in. It is more truth than what we can prove in the lab. So that Amnaniya, in that sense, is a paradigm in which the material exists. And beyond material, what they call metaphysics, it actually doesn't exist. It's not reality for them. It is myth. It's the area of myth. And that's why theology and religion and all of these terminologies, when they study that, they study metaphysics, beyond physics. But angels and Jannah and Nar and Jinn and so forth, this is physics. But we differentiate between al-ghaib wa shahada. Al-shahada is what we know, and al-ghaib is what we don't know. And then maybe eventually, something in the air that we cannot see now, we discover a machine that could see it. Then it becomes shahada. A star that we don't know about, and then eventually we learn about that star when we see it, or we travel to it, then it becomes shahada. And therefore, everything is shahada, but it is ghaib from us. وما كان الله ليطلعكم على الغيب ولكن الله يجتبي برسله من يشاء. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving this ghaib and shahada paradigm in his book, so it puts that in our mind rather than the material paradigm that believes that everything, in order to exist, it has to have a proof. Otherwise, it doesn't exist. It's a myth, and they call it subjective or normative or essential or all of these. This is postmodernism. And when we study knowledge, we're not supposed to look at the world in terms of normativity and non-normativity and essentialization and non-essentialization. And this is a different paradigm from the Islamic paradigm. And this already puts us in a box that would not allow us to Islamize or to apply Islam in today's world, because it would imprison our worldview into a worldview that does not subscribe to Islam. Or we will have what we call sometimes intellectual schizophrenia or methodological schizophrenia. We will have two personalities. A personality that deals with the Quran and another personality that embraces a materialist paradigm, or a paradigm that, somebody is doing psychology, just talking with Freud, and the paradigm is a Freudian paradigm. Pleasure is the source of motivation, and childhood complexes, childhood complexes, and so forth, and therefore it's a different paradigm. But they do Islamic psychology, so they try to Islamize. This is a major problem that we need, as our Prophet is saying, a revision, a restructuring. That's why, if you go to the first slide, please, that is why we propose in Maqasid Institute a project that we call Re-envisioning Islamic Scholarship. This is a book that has my name, but it basically is a result of deliberation with our students and our scholars for a number of years. And we're trying to propose a Maqasid methodology, what we call a Maqasid methodology, in order to re-envision Islamic scholarship. In this paradigm, we're saying that Islamic scholarship is not under theology and is not under religious studies. Islamic scholarship is every discipline and every science. In fact, we're against this disciplinization of knowledge, and we want to shift the disciplines into a new transdisciplinary paradigm that we call phenomena studies. And phenomena studies would not imprison us in the discipline, even though we will need to restructure the discipline before we migrate to phenomena studies. So next. Look for what we ask a few fundamental questions, and then I will go to some details that we train our scholars and students for. This is a long story that we teach over 2 courses, 36 hours each, in which we're trying to reorient our scholars and our students to an Islamic paradigm through the Quran as a source of knowledge. First of all, the fundamental source of knowledge is the Quran, and therefore human knowledge is 2 kinds. Is knowledge that is received from revelation, and therefore is truth, and knowledge that is created, and therefore is under the truth, is subject to the approval of the truth. Every concept that is not in the Quran is subject to the concepts of the Quran. And every objective that is not in the Quran is supposed to be approved by the objectives of the Quran. And every value, and every universal law, I'll talk about the paradigm, under which every element of that paradigm has to be approved by the Quranic knowledge. And if there is any word that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not put in his book, then it does not have sultan. It does not have authority in its own right. You can take and leave from it anything from democracy to patriarchy to development to you name it, the anthropology, however, science or concept has to be under the concept, because there are sides of democracy that are acceptable. If you want to talk political theory from an Islamic point of view, and there are sides of democracy that are rejected. If you talk Islamic political theory, there are sides of a definition of consciousness, let's say, that are acceptable from the Islamic paradigm, and there are theories of consciousness that are not acceptable because the Islamic paradigm is different, and so forth. And therefore, what is the fundamental logic if you want to take the Quran as a source of knowledge? The fundamental logic is the connectivity and purpose, what we call purposeful connectivity. Why? Because logic, if you want to have the Quran speaking to you, is not fragmented, is not partialistic, is not binary. The Quran is teaching us integration, teaching us to connect. Every word in the Quran connects with the rest of the Quran, every ayah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promised to punish كما أنزلنا على المحتسبين الذين جعلوا القرآن عظيم. They cut the Quran into organs. So the nose is in a place and the eyes in a place. This is a lot of what we do sometimes when we take an Islamic approach. We take an ayah without the rest of the ayah, or a hadith without the rest of the hadith. Not just in fiqh, but everywhere. And we fragment. But the basic shift that we need to do in our mantiq, and mantiq is mantiq and is speech really. The logic is, like in terms of Greek or Latin, is a machine of algorithms that is supposed to govern your thinking. And this is not how we define mantiq in Islam. Mantiq is the relationship between al-alamat wal-haqaq, between the signs of Allah, the ayat, the hujjat, the signs of Allah, and the truth. And that conversion from the sign to the truth is the mantiq. Mantiq al-Quran, علمنا منطق الطير. How can the signs that the bird uses or shows lead to a truth? So when you see the bird doing this, then you know that the bird is saying that. That is a mantiq. وَلَدَيْنَا كِتَابٌ يَنطِقُ بِالْحَقِّ. The book has a mantiq because It has science, it has words, it has kitaba, and that kitaba leads to a truth, leads to a realization. Mantiq in that sense has to be the connectivity, and connectivity has to be purposeful. And the shift between causality and purposefulness, or teleology, for a Greek word, but basically the shift from the ilal to the maqasid, not just in fiqh, but in every other science. In fiqh would be the minimum, because the ilal are closest to ibadat and sha'air. And if we're talking about fiqh in terms of the thawabit, the basic fixed parts of Islam, of course, we have to look at the ilal, at the hilal, and at the beginning of the month, the time. This is ibadat. But you cannot look at the hilal and the timing of the day and so on in politics or psychology. This thinking is flawed. You have to look at the objectives and not the causes. There are some causes in medical issues, in environmental issues, but the most important is the purpose. Where are you taking the human body? Where are you taking the environment? What are you trying to do in the future? Which is the purposeful thinking, because the purposeful thinking is not a thinking that looks in the past, it's a thinking that asks why, and therefore looks into the future. It's a future-oriented thinking. It is a critical thinking. It critiques. If the why is not achieved, then it's critical. And therefore, these are some of the fundamental definitions. We're talking about ilm, we're talking about amal, we're talking about every fundamental definition in the Quran. And Dr. Farouqi, I've said this almost every lecture in the past few days, Dr. Farouqi, rahimahullah, has a very important book that's called English for Islamic Studies, in which he is saying there are certain concepts in Islam that are not supposed to be translated into English. And why? Because they have to be said in Arabic. Zina is not fornication, and zakah is not charity, and so forth. This is very interesting. But he is saying that the paradigm that you come from has to be Quran. The words al-mantiq al-Arabi. An Arab is not Ya'rub al-Qahtan al-Adnan al-Quraysh. Arab is not a tribe in Islam. The Quran is talking about al-Arabiya except for the Arab, but al-Arabiya is a lisan. ومن تكلم العربية فهو عربي. The hadith has different narrations, but in any case, if you speak Arabic, you are Arab. You are speaking the language of the Quran. The big question: who is the scholar? Who is the scholar of Islam? We had a history of colonization. After the decline of our civilization of Islam, and we were invaded first from the east to Baghdad, from the Mughals, and from the north, the French, when they invaded North Africa. And since then, almost every major region in the Muslim world has been occupied for a few years or a few centuries. And therefore, colonization, you name it, the Dutch and the Russians and the British and the French and Japanese, whoever occupied the Muslim land, Italians, whatever, they wanted to change the paradigm. They wanted us to think about Islam in a secular way. And they succeeded to a great extent in the Muslim culture. When we say Islam today, we mean a religion in the Western sense. I live in the West, I live in Canada, and when we talk religion, you're talking religious institutions, religious minorities, Christianity, Islam, but you're not talking policy making. You go to a school of policy and you cannot say the word religion. You cannot talk economics when you say religion. This is not what the church does. And when you have Islamic studies, you're producing clergy in the Western side. And when you bring somebody to visit Canada on a visa, you cannot say religious scholars. It's a clergy or a professional. Engineer, doctor, lawyer, now a professional working in the market. But if you have a religious visa, it's called clergy. Clergy is not the paradigm of Islamic scholarship, because Islamic scholarship is not just for the fuqaha, what we call fuqaha, or people who study today what we call Sharia. Sharia is wider than that, and Deen is wider than that, and fiqh is wider than that. Fiqh includes many areas of fiqh that we somehow do not consider to be part of fiqh, but they are fiqh. The fiqh al-siyasa al-shar'iyya, for example. So brothers here who introduce themselves as studying political theory, political science. You are studying fiqh, but fiqh is yes. And those who study architecture, you study fiqh al-amar. There are books in our history that's called fiqh al-amar. And if you read Al-Jahid al-Mu'tazili in his book Al-Hayawan, you will see in the introduction, he is saying that he is writing on fiqh, the kitab on fiqh. So fiqh of what? Fiqh al-Hayawan. Zoology is a fiqh. Biology is a fiqh. When you look at how they wanted to look at the stars and they theorized for the cosmos, etc., in our knowledge, in Bayt al-Hikmah or Buyut al-Hikmah, everywhere, this was fiqh. They did not say, "Oh, I'm not a religious scholar. I'm just a scholar who does astrology or astronomy, or I'm a medical doctor, but I have nothing to do." The back or the medical doctor in Qayrawan or in other places, southern Italy today, Scalia, they were called fuqaha. So the faqih would come to see because the doctor is a faqih, and the psychologist is a faqih, and the architect is a faqih. And that is a different civilization from the secular civilization we're living in today. So who's a scholar? It's actually everybody of knowledge, everybody who rises to the level of ijtihad, not just the scholars of Sharia in the sense of ibadat or the sense of Tashri'ah as in family law, criminal law, etc. As we know in ulum Sharia, of course, this is a scholar. That's not the only scholar. The scholars are everybody who come from an Islamic paradigm. And some scholars sometimes, or some of our students, they say, "Oh, so you want to consider somebody who studies history to be a scholar, or study psychology, or study language to be a scholar?" They're not scholars. I say, no, they are scholars if they come from an Islamic perspective. He's a historian, but he's a Muslim historian, coming from an Islamic perspective. Therefore, history is an Islamic knowledge. Why do we study history at a different level? And then we do not consider historians to be Muslim scholars. Or we study the physics from a different paradigm, then you're not a Muslim scholar. But if you approach physics from an Islamic paradigm, how does Islam deal with physics or engineering? How does it deal with knowledge? That would be next, please. We divided scholarship into these four sectors that we thought would be useful for now. We thought that Islamic studies have to be divided into four different intersecting areas. One that is called Usuli studies, in which we study the usul that we inherited from our knowledge, usul al-din, including usul al-fiqh, usul al-kalam, the usul in general, and they are closest to the studying of the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet. These are, if you wish, the basic sciences, the fundamental sciences that we study. But this is not only Islamic studies. Islamic studies could be also disciplinary studies. And disciplinary is divided today into humanities, social sciences, applied sciences, and natural sciences. This division is problematic from an Islamic point of view, but this division has to be under Islamic studies, because Islamic studies so far is under humanities, under theology, or under social sciences, under sociology. So sociology, you study society of Muslims, and you study the Ottoman period between this year and this year, and you study Istanbul. That is Islamic studies. But no, we're saying Islamic studies is every study, but coming from an Islamic perspective, and we have to define that. The third circle that we call phenomena studies is how we would like to migrate the disciplinary studies towards the future. Because disciplinary studies are specialized, and the specializations people claim have epistemologies that are different. They say that you cannot bring arts into the study of engineering, or sociology into the study of religion, or mechanical engineering into the study of political science, because these are different epistemologies, they say. This is not an Islamic concept. In fact, this is against the Islamic approach. The Islamic approach does not have different epistemologies for ilm. Ilm is ilm. Al-usul al-ilm is the same. But you apply al-ilm, tanzeel al-ilm, tatbiq al-ilm is different to different areas. And therefore, we believe that we should not be imprisoned in the disciplinary paradigm, and we should move from that into the phenomenal paradigm. But how can we do that? First, we have to encourage multidisciplinarity, because multidisciplinarity is going to shake the monopoly over the boundaries of the discipline, and is going to bring new ideas to economics. And nobody will tell you, oh no, this is not economics. You should not get into political science now because this is economics. But you say no, the political impact on economics is a major impact, and the cultural impact, and so forth. And multidisciplinarity hopefully will lead to, if you wish, the reconstruction of disciplines into a transdisciplinary approach, because disciplines are coming from a different objective. Disciplines, and I work in the admin of education in some parts of my career. In the admin of education, you are serving the economy. You cannot justify in your university or in the secular system unless you convince the government that this is better for the economy. While you're creating jobs, you're looking at certain things that you will resolve. It's an economic paradigm that by which we are administering our education. The Islamic education paradigm is not market driven. The Islamic education paradigm has to do with ilm, because ilm builds the society, and the good society, a vibrant society, and mujtama' al-salih will have a good economy, and people will live well. But the education is not necessarily pushing a certain economic agenda. And therefore, to move disciplines into transdisciplinarity is to get into phenomenon studies. And we were calling in that humble book of mine, I can send inshallah, a copy to whoever asks for it. And we have some copies that we can send. We have Ahmed who is the director of Maqasid Institute Malaysia, and he has books that he can bring inshallah. So what we are proposing in this phenomena studies, a certain number of phenomena that we would like to start by making them disciplines in their own right. We were saying, for example, global warming or environmental, we call it environmental corruption, al-fasad al-ard, basically, al-fasad al-bi, because this is how we should name it. Environmental corruption should start to be a discipline. And people, when they specialize in that, they will look at the economics and the politics, they will look at the law, they will look at the society, they will look at animals and plants and the history of Earth, and they will look at many things, rather than dealing with the environmental problem only through a lens that will never solve the environmental problem. Politics will never resolve that. Environmental engineering is not made to resolve the environmental problem. And economics is not made to resolve poverty. We're calling for a phenomena study, making poverty a phenomenon to be studied, a specialization, to specialize in poverty. Because economics does not aim to resolve poverty. Economics aim to increasing GDP and development. And this is a paradigm that we could eventually try to change. This is the reality so far. But educationally, we will need to think about poverty in a different way, because poverty has psychological sides and cultural sides, and economic, obviously, and political sides. Pandemics was one of the things we put in there, because a pandemic is not just a medical phenomenon, and the solution is not just a vaccine. It is a major transfer of wealth from the poor to the rich, as the COVID did, really, because it was approached in a way that is not trying to resolve the pandemic issue. It is trying to benefit from the pandemic and let the market work and let the politicians do the job, etc. So post-pandemic, the rich is, I think, 2 times or 3 times richer, and the poor is 2 or 3 times poorer everywhere in the world. So this is because there is a problem with the perception of the crisis, of the phenomenon. But if we look at the pandemics as a phenomenon in its own right and study it well, and propose different solutions for it that have political, economic, and social dimensions, etc., therefore we are able to deal from the Islamic perspective in a better way. And we took out strategic studies from disciplinary studies and made a circle for it, because we believe that we're lacking a lot. Nobody is strategizing for the Ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There are strategizing for states and companies. Every major company has major strategy teams, and every state has strategy departments, and this is all fine. But we need to strategize for the Ummah. We need somebody to say, well, what are the resources of the Ummah Muhammad, and how can the Ummah Muhammad move forward? Not just in nations or companies or groups or tribes, but basically as an Ummah. Next, please. So, next. Therefore, the secular classification of disciplines, as I'm saying, if we accept it for now, and I understand some of the colleges, even in this great university, goes by these disciplines, we have to have an approach to these disciplines so that we approach them in an Islamic manner. Next. The Islamic classification, the contemporary Islamic classification as well, what we call the historical disciplines or the inherited disciplines, tafsir and hadith and fiqh and falsafa and so forth. Or when we talk about Islamic thought, psychology, finance, art, and so on. Or in secular academia, people who are coming from quote-unquote confessional background. This is not enough to do. We have to approach disciplines in a different way. Next. So what we teach our students and researchers is a 5-step kind of methodology that is meant to be guidelines. This is not meant to be an algorithm, and those 5 steps are not meant to be in order, but rather intersecting circles of thinking, how to generate fiqh. We suggest that you start with a purpose, not with a problem. Because if you start with a problem and you do not have a framework from the Quran and Sunnah, you are misdefining the problem. The problem is underdevelopment. That is a misdefined problem. Because development, as I said, does not necessarily solve social problems or people's affairs. You are defining the problem as patriarchy. You're defining the problem as, in the West, every university now is sexual freedoms and sexual orientation. That is not a problem because Islam does not have this as a problem. Islam has zawaj and zina, Islam has men and women, and it's much simpler than that. And of course, there are psychological problems. That is how you can define that. So if you want to define this phenomenon of basically sexual deviation as a psychological problem, then you can start to define it this way. What is your purpose? It's to cure the society from it. There are legal sides, there are psychological sides, there are political sides, and so now we can discuss that. But your problem should not be actually any of the types of freedom, economic freedom and political freedom, and you name it. This is not a problem, because if you really look critically at the paradigm through which economic freedom is proposed, this is a paradigm that is serving particular interests. It's not serving humanity. And from the Islamic point of view, this is a paradigm that has nothing to do with how we perceive economy and how we perceive wealth and how we distribute wealth and so forth. And therefore, purpose is very important. And here comes your reading of the Quran, the Sunnah of Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, because the Quran will give you purpose. You are a military sciences person. So when you read the Quran, you will read it with different eyes. You are not going to give fatwa in family law or criminal law. You don't know this thing. But you will give fatwa in military science because you are reading the Quran, trying to understand how does it deal with war and how does it deal with strategy as in military strategy and how does it deal. And we have a couple of students actually from military colleges of our researchers who are trying to read the Quran with those eyes. And they observe different things from somebody who comes from a legal perspective like myself, and I just read for the law, and I'm oriented always for the law, or at least for the fatwa. I also work in the area of fatwa, but not really for the sake of military science. We have a group of architects in Cairo who are thinking of Islamic architecture. What is the purpose of Islamic architecture? It's for the architecture to increase al-khayr, the good in the society. The purpose of architecture is not efficiency, even though efficiency is good. It's good to have an efficient system and heating and cooling, but this is not the purpose how we decide how to design things. And therefore, you could have something that does not have a function, a material function, but it has a cultural function or has, writing on the domes, for example. We have a student who's writing her thesis on the ayat on the different domes in, I think in Istanbul, and trying to see what is the impact of the ayat. There is a difference when you write on the wall, وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَآتُوا الزَّكَاةَ versus إِنَّ أَوَّلَ بَيْتٍ وُضِعَ لِلنَّاسِ لَلَّذِي بِبَكَّةَ versus وَجَاهِدُوا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ وَقَاتِلُوا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ الَّذِينَ يُقَاتِلُونَكُمْ. These are different ayat that bring different messages to the society. And in terms of the amara or the architecture, they want to see what verses do we put. And I was talking with my colleagues and they told me, when he chose the details, down to the details of the mosque, that is someone with an Islamic approach, an Islamic agenda, because whatever you put on the wall is going to shape the perception of the children at home, it's going to shape the perception of what people come when they see the mosque and the masjid and so forth. Purpose. And then the Quran and Sunnah, the cycles of reflection is a bit complex, because when you read the book of Allah, you have to ask, what am I looking for? And how do Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala open my mind and heart for new ideas in this book? And this is next step of framework, but I want to stop at the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because the Hadith is complex. And if you're not a specialist, you will kind of get lost in the books of Sunnah, because the books of Sunnah are either going by the Isnad and the Tarikh, so Alif, Ba, Ta, and therefore they are collections of Hadith according to the Sahabi who narrated the Hadith, or they are going by the Abwab al-Fiqh. And Abwab al-Fiqh is different from the fiqh you are trying to generate. You are studying architecture. But then when you open a Bukhari or Muslim, كتاب الإيمان وكتاب الصلاة وكتاب الزكاة مرتب على أبواب الفقه. Or الفقه البخاري في أبواب البخاري. Bukhari's fiqh is in تبويب, أبواب. And he was a great faqih, don't get me wrong, but he does not fit what you are trying to do as an economist, because the economy doesn't go by these abwab. And therefore, you kind of have to put the hadith that is relevant to your research under the abwab of your study. So if you study economics and you're going macro, at the macro level, you're defining al-mal, for example, then you look for al-mal in the hadith of the Prophet. You look for money. What is the definition of money? And it is a different definition from these nice papers that we use, that they have no value since the time the Americans they don't even have any relation with anything. It's just papers and numbers on the screen. And this is quite a problem. How can we deal with this problem? When you go to the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, you start to read al-mal this way. How did he deal with al-mal? And how does the Quran define property and define wealth? Wealth is not a number on the screen that is enforced by the power of the state. It is actually something that has a value. And that is a very different economy. And that is an economy that is based on infaq, more than hifz. I'm asked sometimes about hifz al-mal in terms of Maqasid Sharia. And I say, if it's up to me, I call it infaq al-mal, not hifz al-mal. Because infaq al-mal is more important than hifz al-mal. And it is a maqsid of the Sharia to spend. Every time you do something wrong, they ask you, or Sharia asks you to spend in the way of life. You free a slave, or you give sadaqah, or you feed somebody, or you go slaughter something for al-bayt al-atiq, or for, and so forth. It's infaq al-mal. Therefore, when you look at the Quran and you bring the Sunnah in, Hadith is much more complex. Perhaps maybe one day we have a seminar on it and so forth, because it will require some deeper look at how we deal with the Sunnah. Next, the cycle, the framework. If you go next, and then we go. You go next to the framework. Oh, okay, that's problem versus definition. Next. And these are the cycles of reflection. Of course, the learning Arabic, we stop here. The learning Arabic is an issue, and I suggest that everybody learns Arabic. I am hearing that most people here know Arabic, which is really important. Arabic is the language of Islam. And yes, I'm speaking English just for the sake of, I guess, some people who are not qualified in the Arabic language, but please Arabic is important. If you're going to do that kind of ijtihad, you need to understand the Quran firsthand. You cannot read the translation. Translation is good for the general thought, for an assignment, or to publish a small article. But if you want to do foundational research, you have to understand the book of Allah as it is. Because, as we mentioned, the Arabic of the Quran is different from any other translation. So, next, please. So, this is the conceptual framework. And we were suggesting those 7 elements that are not our ideas, really. They are a summary, if you wish, of how the Islamic thought is trying to renew itself today. It is trying to renew itself through al-Maqasid, or objectives in English, al-Mafahim, excuse me, that is called concepts. Many scholars who are actually dealing with Mafahim are actually dealing with Islamic thought, are dealing with Mafahim. So concepts, al-Mafahim, is very important. And if you look down, there's groups. And al-Fi'at are tied to al-Mafahim, because al-Ilm is how we define the ulama, and al-Hukm is how we define al-Hukam, and so forth. Al-Islah is how we define the Muslihun, and al-Ifsad, and al-Kufr, and Iman, and Nifaq, and so forth. Every concept in Arabic is tied to the group, just with the tasrif of the kalim. It's like any other language that is a daughter or granddaughter of Arabic, like Latin or English or Hebrew. These are slangs of Arabic that developed in a funny way, and therefore they lost the structure of the Arabic language. Still a little bit in the Hebrew, coming from the Aramaic, but it's not really as evident as it is in the Arabic language. Arabic, kataba, yaktubu, maktaba, kitab, maktub, kutayib, everything is going to be kataba, and that ties the concepts to the groups. The values or al-qiyam, we divide them according to, again, to Farouk, into the values of morality, qiyam al-khuluq, and values of beauty, qiyam al-jamal, and values of benefit, qiyam al-manfa'a. So al-manfa'a, wal-jamal, wal-khuluq. And you read that in the Quran, and this is part of your paradigm. Commands or the awamir wal-nawahi, universal laws of the Sunnah al-Ilahiyya. There's a whole section in the book on the types of Sunnah al-Ilahiyya. Sunnah al-Ilahiyya would be the meta laws, the higher level of principles that you apply in any science. And the proofs are al-hujjah, basically the difference between al-mughalatat, or the false fallacies, and truths, or al-hujjaj, al-haq, and so forth. So those 7 elements, the integration of which would be a worldview. And they are not that different. They are intersecting circles. A test, for example, is an objective. It's a maqsid, and it's a mafhum, it's a concept, it's a value, and it's a command, and it's a law, universal law, qa'iman bil-qist. So there are many intersections between all of these 7 elements, but basically we're putting them for our students to open their minds to, when they read the Quran, what are they going to look for? Look for concepts, look for objectives, look for qiyam, values, look for groups, categories, look for Sunnah Ilahiyya. And we train them to read the Quran and look for these from their perspective and their discipline or their phenomenon, so that they can start to form effect and understanding. That to start to form what we call in today's language al-fikr al-Islami, Islamic thought. I don't believe in the distinction between al-fikr and fiqh, because it's all fiqh. In the Quranic language, it's fiqh. We have in the Quran yatafakkarun. Tafakkur is reflection, deep thinking. But fiqh is not just about sharia, as I mentioned, but fiqh is everything. So next, it's very important to have critical studies of 3 things: of literature of others, and literature of ours as Muslims, and the reality. We have to critique the lived realities. How do you assess the current reality, al-waqa? How do you assess al-waqa? Fiqh al-waqa that Ibn al-Qayyim talked about, rahimahullah. How do you assess fiqh al-waqa? What is good and what is bad? We mentioned that development theory, for example. People take it as a criteria by which you measure economic welfare in a society. But that is not how we should assess the reality, and that is tied to assessing the past and assessing the future as well. So basically, we have to critique through our framework the lived reality and say that the lived reality is different from the ideal reality from the Islamic point of view, and therefore we have to critique. And we have to critique Islamic scholarship. And it is not right that when we start to critique one of our scholars or one of our narrators, people say that you are throwing dirt on scholars and so on. And if you do scholarship in a khutbah in the masjid, yes, of course, you have to tell the ummah that its history is great and it is great. But when you do scholarship, you have to allow yourself to critique. You know, every scholar critique al-Bukhari, critique Muslim, and Ibn Hajar critique the Bukhari. That's for hadith, if you are interested in that. And everybody critiqued everybody. And they said, no, this is not right, or I don't agree with this evaluation, and so forth. And we should not, as scholars, live in the bubble of the greatness of the scholars of the past, confused with infallibility. They were great, but they were not infallible. And the Sahaba were great, but they were not infallible. And without doing that, it's not possible to create Islamic scholarship, because you have to be able to look at realities in the past or in the present with a critical eye. What is the standard? The standard is the Quran, the Book of Allah, and the truth. And when you critique the reality in terms of the truth, you are going to start to have a meaningful engagement with Islamic scholarship. So read Ibn Khaldun, but be ready to critique Ibn Khaldun. Ibn Khaldun is not Quran, and Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah is not Quran, and so forth. And be able to say, well, I agree with Imam Shafi'i, but I don't agree with Jihad al-Talab, for example. I don't agree that we fight people because they are kuffar, not because they are mu'tadeen or aggressive. That's, to me, one of the mistakes of Imam Shafi'i. You could disagree with me, but then we have to have critique of the Islamic scholarship. And we have to consider all schools of Islamic thought, classical and contemporary. And I would request from our students, especially our researchers, and I know our professors are probably agreeing with me, that we look at the differences with a more open mind. It is the same Sharia, but it's just different fiqh. Fiqh could be different. It's the same Sharia. None of those is outside the circle of Sharia. But fiqh could be right and could be wrong. But it's the same Sharia. The Shafi'i and the Hanafi and the Ja'fari, for that matter, and the Ibadi. This is fiqh. And you could disagree with some of them, and you could disagree with a lot. But at the end, it is the same Sharia. It is the same Aqidah. But some are Salafiyya, some are Ash'ari, Maturidiyya, Mu'tazila. This is the same Aqidah, not a different Aqidah. Disagree with the Mu'tazila like I do disagree on a number of issues. But at the end, they are Firqat, Islamiyya. We should not do takfir to the past or to the present. I see a lot of takfir here in Malaysia and this visit, even over politics, for God's sake, like just politics, people do takfir. But politics is not Quran. You agree to international alliances or you don't agree with international alliances. What is Quran Iran here? This is just politics. So anyway, consider Islamic schools of thought as all representative and critique their error. And non-Islamic scholarship, we have to critique. You cannot study psychology in an Islamic college like this respected college based on Darwin or Maslow or what is that again, the cognitive school or psychoanalysis. You cannot really do this as you study psychology. You cannot study political science, and your reference is Machiavelli or Marx or Hegel, or it doesn't work. And you study sociology and your reference is Durkheim, and Durkheim is your, and then the Quran, you apologize for Durkheim. You say, oh, here is what Durkheim talked about in this ayah. No, that is unacceptable. The ayah should critique Durkheim. His definition of individual identification, for example, this is wrong, and we don't make people identify themselves as anything, male or female or belonging to a tribe. This is not a self-identification process. We have identification as an outside criteria. وإذا قيل لهم لا تفسدوا في الأرض قالوا إنما نحن مصلحون ألا إنهم هم المفسدون ولكن لا يشعرون. They are the corrupt. They can say they are reformers. You know, a woman could say she's a man as much as she wants. She's a woman at the end, and a man is the same. You see, and following these philosophies would lead us outside Islam, because these philosophies come from a non-Islamic worldview. And therefore, next, if you will have kind of two paradigms, if you wish. I don't know if this is the next slide. A kind of two paradigms, where the objective concepts, parties, and where the law, etc., are from the revelation, from the Quran and Sunnah, versus the other worldview that has the concepts, objectives, and so on from the secular world. And of course, there is intersection. You will find justice in every philosophy, trying to achieve justice. And some of it will intersect with our concept of pistis. Pistis is a Latin word, justas, and justice. It's the same origin. It's the granddaughter of the Arabic word. But basically, pistis developed in the justice systems in something that we could agree or disagree with sometimes. Next, please. And therefore, you need to join the growing movement of searching for the Quranic holistic patterns. And reasoning here should be following what is called emergence. Emergence or an insha or a tawleed has to do with coming up with a theory. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if you follow the concept of insha in the Quran, is something that emerges out of so many parts. You see, the whole is more than the sum of the parts, as they say in the philosophy in some area. This is like ثم أنشأناه خلقا آخر فتبارك الله أحسن الخالقين. Allah does insha of us from the part, from, he said, the bones and the muscles and the meat and that, and then we emerge as something else. This emergence, we need to study the current thinkers of Islam, how they emerged their theory. If you study anybody, like I have like many names in this book, 100 names, from Rashid Rida to Malik al-Nabi to whoever, how did they come up with their thinking? It's because they have an analysis based on a number of items that compose a framework. And then something will emerge out of your face. Something will tell you, oh, I have a different theory from the theory of, let's say, equality, as one of our researchers did in her research, saying, I started from a premise of equality of men and women, and I realized from reflecting on the Quran that the Quran does not have equality. The Quran doesn't define it like that. Everything is unequal, and everybody is unequal, but we don't know the worth. Maryam is better than most men, and so forth. Like she started to, so you see, things will emerge when you start to analyze with a fresh eye, and you look at the Quran in a way that is new. I want to stop here because I think that this is a lot of information already, and Jazakallah khair again for allowing me to give an overview of this humble attempt to continue the road. Barakallahu feekum. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you very much.
Sorry.
جزاكم الله خيرا. شكرا على هذه المحاضرة. Now we open the floor for questions. So may we have some questions from the professors? Yes, please.
I listened to your talk you delivered yesterday.
Oh, as
And,
well. I repeated
as well.
a few things.
Because repetition is unavoidable, the Quran also repeats. I did have some questions I brought forward from yesterday's talk. And then I kind of, it embedded themselves in me. And I thought I'll ask you these few questions. And you encouraged critiquing. So I thought I will take the cue.
Absolutely, I learned from them.
Okay, basically, my name is Noor Muhammad Khalid. I'm from India. I'm doing my PhD in STEC on Maqasid Sharia and the role of Shah Waliullah in contributing to Maqasid Sharif. So that's just for a quick background. Now, I've been intrigued by certain books I've been reading on Maqasid. One of which is from my own supervisor. Lucky he's not here to listen to me. It was called Regrounding Maqasid Sharif. Now, I did read a lot of reading even before I joined my PhD or got accepted for my PhD. And I started wondering whether this entire process of, you call it re-envisioning scholarship, and then you said it is the same as Maqasid methodology. You can correct me if I haven't understood you well. I'm going to paraphrase you quite a bit, and I run the risk of making mistakes. So, what was the need for regrounding Maqasid? And in all the discussions on regrounding Maqasid, the quote unquote allegation is the previous scholars relied more on fiqh, usul al-fiqh, rather than on the Quran. I find that to be stretching it too far. Is it to say that those scholars who went before us, from Juhayni to Ghazali to Shatibi to, you forgot Shah Waliullah all along the way, even in your introduction. All of a sudden, yeah, I mean, I understand, because South Asians are always at a disadvantage, but this is not racism. So, what happened eventually was, even Ibn Ashur, this gentleman, Allah yarhamhu, he had the courtesy to say that he accepts these 5 maqasid, hifz falan, hifz falan, hifz falan. At the same time, he proposed some innovations within that, but he did not unnecessarily create what is called a disruption. Today, I worked in IT for 33 years, and I also got to know through yesterday's talk that you were also into this kind of field. And you luckily mentioned prologue in that talk of yours. And I used to ask people, but that's for another day. I used to teach artificial intelligence, and then I asked people, why didn't it become very popular until now? And most people don't know. I'll not tell you the answer right now unless you ask. So my question was, is this wanting to reframe the maqasid, as far as you call it, re-envisioning scholarship, it sounds perfectly well. But then again, trying to disrupt. I was using the word disrupt because in my previous employment, we used to talk about disruptive technologies to be able to, create a niche for yourself. Are you repeating the same thing? Like trying to make a niche for yourself, trying to make yourself more acceptable by coming up with things which you think are new, but which I totally disagree with your permission, of course. So what I'm trying to contend is that re-envisioning scholarship is fine, reimagining many of the things is fine, innovation is fine, coming up with better explanations than what has been provided by Shah Waliullah or Ashraf Ali Thanvi, etc. Like, for example, there is a book which my brother Jawad gave me on explaining the rational reasons for revelation. Now, maybe we have better arguments today, but then trying to say, I would rather say insinuating the scholarship of old by saying that they moved away from the Quran and they relied more on, like Shah Waliullah would call it, ulum al-hadith. Okay, I really don't think, because in the explanation to Shah Waliullah's explanation on the importance of ulum al-hadith, the explanation given by Maulana or Sheikh Palanpuri, Allah yarhamhu, all these people are all Allah yarhamhu, except some of the living scholars. So what he was trying to say is that ulum al-hadith includes also ulum al-tafsir. So this is one of my points. I know this will become lecture. multidisciplinary.
Can I-
Will,
Can I answer?
can I finish these whole list of
I
questions?
forget.
How many?
Okay, please, but I might not be given another chance.
I know.
I think we should go straight to the question because.
Yeah, that's the question.
Yeah, thank you.
That's question number 1. I have question number 2, 3, 4, and 5. If you permit me.
No, I give you my thoughts.
No, the reason is that I have begun to believe that in the name of critique, we are accepting everybody who critiques except wanting to critique ourselves.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, see, yes, I did not mention Charlie by the way, but I mentioned him in this conversation of mine. And I am actually working on the tahqiq of his project life. And that was a recommendation by our Ustaz Sheikh Qaradawi, because he felt that the tahqiq of Sheikh Sayyid Sabiq was not enough. And I was a fellow with the Fiqh Academy of India. So I got some really old, 3 old manuscripts of Hujjatullah. I'm working on them with a number of students. So actually, I have a lot of interest in Shawdillah.
You were there in 2003 during the seminar at the Hamdard College.
At the Hamdard, yes. That's the first time I went to India, and then afterwards I continued. Rahimullah, So basically, no, and so forth. But not addressing the Quran is that because they were experts of the Quran. What they talk about Maqasid al-Sharia was not about that. Imam Shatibi said that he did istiqra of Tafasil al-Sharia. Istiqra as an induction. Tafasil al-Sharia as a Tafasil al-Fiqh. The theory that they produced is a theory, to me, is a theory in Quran, not a Quranic tafsir mawdu'i, tafsir nahwi or tafsir nazmi, of course, and so forth. And tafsir al-nazmi is a school I wrote about as well in that book, because I learned from tafsir al-nazmi. But the Shatibi's muwafaqat, the Juwayni's masalih, and Imam Ghazali really reworded Juwayni's. And Al-Amiri, Fayyasuf, he was talking about the hudud and hikam al-hudud. He's not talking about the Quran. So Mazaj al-Qatl al-Nafs. So the whole history of Maqasid al-Sharia, I have a couple of books on that history, is not an analysis of the Quran. That's not how we read. Were they experts of the Quran? Of course, but this is not their approach. Their approach was not to study the Quran, but rather to do istiqra of al-fiqh, to come up with what you could call qawa'id al-fiqh, and that is the paradigm of the Maqasid. So is this new? No, not claiming that these ideas are new, but claiming that these ideas are part of the necessary renewal. So the word re-envisioning, these are just words to present ideas of tajdeed, of renewal. We're trying to renew some of the thought. But this is not new. I am quoting everybody from Al-Jahid to Muhammad Abdu and so forth. So, but everybody who's trying to add something to knowledge, they stand on the shoulders of giants. But they would have their view. So when we critique, we're not putting down anybody. Of course, these are a'lam, kibar, but we're trying to serve the ummah as much as they serve. And you come from a generation of prologues, so probably we have a similar age. But basically, as we grow older, we try to teach our students and our grandchildren how to think about Islam and how they could live with it. And then we go, and then they continue with the flag of Islam. Jazakallah khair. I will entertain the rest. I'll give you my card.
Maybe one of the rare scholars who replies.
Yeah, no problem. Yes.
Assalamualaikum. I am Dr. Anila from Department of Suluddin and Comparative Religion. Thank you very much for very I believe this is a very important kind of reformation, because it is trying to activate or to stimulate kind of integration with the new disciplines, which is we know that nowadays we cannot even limit the number of disciplines, and this is what we call as the phenomena. And I'm here maybe to continue with what was asked before, something that is related to quite fundamental. When you name your kind of theory and approach as Maqasid, I believe it is Maqasid Sharia also, right? Oh, it is only Maqasid.
Maqasid is the Sharia.
So it seems to me that it is a new approach. It's not anything related with the Maqasid Sharia by Shatibi.
I can answer that.
Okay, so I thought this is actually an extension from Sharia, because when you because you also mentioned about fiqh just now, because I just want to ask, isn't it too much if we want to putting everything under the name of Sharia or fiqh? Because we know that the law is basically, the purpose is to curb and to control, because it is something very important in our life. But now we are going to extend it and to expand it to something about innovation, something on creativity, something that is needed by man. And from another angle, we are talking about in religion, in Islam, of course, we are talking about the purpose of, we try to understand actually the God's purpose of having good and right and wrong here, good and bad, by having the rulings. And at the same time here, I can see even you yourself also try to put it into two different frameworks. And I can see what we need today is actually about the man's purpose in life. There are many things that we want to achieve in this life, including economics, including politics, society, and etc. So isn't it not too much if we want to kind of unite all these purposes into one system? Because I'm actually from area of research into ethics and morality, in which I found that there is a kind of missing line here on the real understanding of khuluq, the morality in Islam, because what is reflected by morality and ethics in the West is very, because I can see this is actually a real potential area in which you can, because in the ethics, one of the issues is about idealistic, achievement of man. So here is actually, we are talking about purpose and why man can achieve at the highest end. Being a Muslim supposedly is something very important in the Quran. So that is basically my question. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Is this paradigm Maqasid Sharia? The paradigm Maqasid Sharia would be a special case of the Maqasid approach. Because the Maqasid approach, I use the word Maqasid in Arabic in order to refer to the Maqasid of the Quran. But Maqasid approach is an objective-based, purpose-based thinking. It's a thinking one. It is not a legal one. And yes, it could have implications on the Sharia, Sharia, as in Ijtihad and Qiyas and so forth. Maqasid has something to do with this, but it is not Maqasid Sharia. Maqasid Sharia is a special case of the general Maqasid thinking approach. And the Maqasid that we centralize in this methodology is Maqasid Quran. Because we believe that Maqasid Sharia are part of Maqasid. There is something of Nafs in Maqasid Quran, of course. But Maqasid Quran has al-taqwa wal-'abd wal-tawheed wal-islah and so forth. So many concepts that are also tied to Maqasid Sharia, but they are wider. And when you study one of the sciences, you might not find some of the Maqasid Sharia suitable for the Maqasid of psychology, for example. You are looking at something related to al-qalb wal-nafs, والعقل والفؤاد واللب and become different, والحزن والهم والغم, some other concepts that you centralize and not necessarily Maqasid Sharia. And you think it's too much to put everything under one system, of course, but it's not one system. It's just discussing methodology. We're discussing manhajiyya for the methodology. You apply to many sciences, but I'm not trying to change many. I have only one specialization in the areas of fiqh and so forth. But I try to add something in the area of methodology or approach or manhaj that applies, but, you know, it's not aiming to achieve, to change it.
Thank you very much. I think due to time constraints, I can accept only 2 more questions, I guess. So straight to the point, please.
Right, sir? It's okay. We can share what's.
Question is, the Maqasid Sharia is prioritizing themness in some cases. I realize it. What do you mean about prioritizing themness? Themness.
Prioritizing the Nas, yeah, that's prioritizing the Quran, the Nas.
No, I think. No, even.
المصلحة والنص.
دكتور هو يريد ان يقول، هو لاحظ ان المقاصد الشريعه مقدمه على النصوص الشرعيه. وهذا ما تعليقه؟ ما تعليقه؟
بين المقصد والنص. I don't believe in this. I don't believe that Nas. I don't think you have a dichotomy between al-maslaha or al-nas, or al-maqsid and al-nas. Nas is the entry point, it's the fundamental, is your source of knowledge. And then you read the nas, and from the nas you want to apply a maslaha, you want to achieve a maslaha. You see, Imam al-Tufi, if you're referring to this, I think was misunderstood. I don't think that he comes from this bipolar kind of al-maslaha or nas. It's a risala that you are referring to, I wrote about many years ago. And I think he is misunderstood. If you really need, you will see that he is applying the nas. And what he calls al-maslaha is i'mal masalih, is different masalih, but it's the same nas.
Last question, please.
Okay, I was afraid this will happen. That's what you should ask.
How can we implement the Maqasid methodology of Islamic economic framework?
The answer is very long, and I'm not a specialist, so I invite you to join the Maqasid Research Network. There is maqasid.org on this website, and then there is somewhere Maqasid Research Network. And ask to join the economics research group. There are people who are mostly economists who are discussing this question. What is economy from an Islamic point of view? And some of them are very capitalist and they're fighting for capitalism. And some of them want to change everything into gold and silver and so on, which I'm closer to. But because I'm not an economist, I cannot tell you really.
Thank you very much. We actually need to conclude the session here because yesterday will be adding to that right after this meeting. So we thank you very much for the insightful and wonderful methodology that you share with us. Also, we are very honored. Thank you for coming here. So before we disperse, we'd like to invite Professor Dr. Shukran, Dean of Healthcare Villages, to present a token of appreciation to Professor Dr. Yasir. Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Shukran. So on behalf of Healthcare Villages, I would like to extend my gratitude and thanks to the Professor Yasir and all the academics, professors for joining us today. And inshallah, we hope to see you again in next event. So with that, we end our session here with the recitation of the Quran.
I just wanted to say that I really wanted to continue the discussion with all of you, but I have to go to the airport. So I head to the airport and please, you have my contacts and email with Professor Shukran. I repeat my thanks and dua for all of you. Please do dua for us. Barakallahu feekum. Barakallahu lakum. نسأل الله سبحانه وتعالى أن يتقبل منكم وأن يغفر لكم لصالح الأعمال وأن ينفع بكم البلاد والعباد. نسأل الله سبحانه وتعالى أن يبارك فيكم وأن يفتح لكم أبواب الخير. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات. سلام على المسلمين والحمد لله.